What's up everyone, I'm Mike with woodshopmike.com and today I'm saying goodbye to my Powermatic 72A.
The first thing I need to do is get the extension table removed and move the Powermatic out of the way. For the longest time, I fought not having an engine hoist and pallet jack in the shop because I didn't want to have to store them, but time and time again, they've been super helpful. And if you can't tell, good dust collection was not a feature on my old school Powermatic. I wasn't completely sure about things when I saw that the saw came in a cardboard box and not a wooden crate, but this was actually pretty awesome and way easier to unpack than the wooden crates that I've had to deal with in the past. Everything inside the box comes individually wrapped, and the cast iron table and extension wings have corrosion inhibiting paper on them that require minimal cleanup with mineral spirits. The table saw is secured to the pallet with 2 bolts, and once these are removed the table saw can then be lifted off the pallet. If you plan on using a mobile base or setting the saw on any kind of platform, this is an ideal time to do that. To get the saw into position under the engine hoist, I ended up needing to put some 2x4s on the forks of the pallet jack so I could lift the pallet high enough to get the legs of the engine hoist under the pallet. With this in place, I then put some cardboard on top of the saw to keep it from getting dented or scratched, along with some 2x4s to keep the straps from potentially being cut on the hard edges of the saw's top. With the straps in place, I hooked the engine hoist to a chain and lift the saw off the pallet. And yes, I know, ratchet straps are technically not for lifting, but these are rated for a much higher load than the weight of this saw. That said, if you're not comfortable with this method, just trick a couple of friends into coming over and helping you lift the saw off the pallet. Full disclosure though, your friends might think twice before coming over next time. To attach the extension wings to the saw, I first remove the bolts and washers in the main table, and then wipe down the mating surfaces, and then clamp some 2x4s to the underside of the main table and set the wing in place. I then run in the bolts with the washers in the front and back holes. I lift the wing higher than the main table and tighten the bolts down enough to hold the table in place. Then, using a dead blow hammer, I tap the wing until it's flush with the main table. I then install the middle bolt and fully tighten them all down. A table saw will be much more accurate and easier to use if the entire work surface is coplanar. To check for this, I lay a straight edge across the main table and each extension wing. As you see, there is a gap at the far edge of the extension wing that needs to be corrected. To correct this, I first remove the wing and wipe the mating surfaces down again. Next, I apply a strip of masking tape below the bolt holes on the main table and then reinstall the extension wing and check the results. If the wing is still not coplanar, you'll need to continue to adjust the layers and location of tape until the 2 surfaces are coplanar. Next up, I install the 4-inch dust collection hose adapter and connect the 3-inch hose inside the cabinet. This hose connects the shroud that does an awesome job of collecting dust from the underside of the blade. To attach the rip fence guide rails, I found it easiest to first insert the bolt closest to the middle of the rail and then pivot it so that I could run the other bolts in. At this point, I leave all the bolts a bit loose so that I can easily adjust them while I install the additional extension wings. These composite extension wings install in almost the identical fashion as the cast iron ones, with 3 bolts at each joint, and they also bolt to the rip fence guide rails. With all the extension wings in place, I now attach the support legs through the side of the far right wing. Now I'm ready to make the rip fence guide rails parallel to the top. To do this, I set my height right above the far left bolt in the guide rail and tighten that bolt almost all the way. I then adjust the height at the bolt on the right side extension wing. From there, I adjust the composite extension wings to be the same height as the rest of the table and then tighten down all the remaining bolts in the guide rail. With the front guide rail dialed in, I now repeat the process for the back guide rail. For the next few adjustments, I need to have the blade installed. To do this, rotate the orange section of the dust collection shroud to the right and remove the arbor nut and flange. With the blade installed, tighten the arbor nut and flange down with the included offset wrenches and place the table saw insert back into the table cutout. Now it's time to level the table insert. To do this, I laid a straight edge across the tabletop and adjust the 4 jack screws until the insert was flush with the straight edge. Now I need to make sure the blade and miter slots are parallel. To do this, I grab my combination square and set the distance so that it contacts a tooth at the front of the blade, with the body of the square resting against the side of the miter slot. I then rotate the blade 180 degrees and measure the distance between the miter slot and the same tooth I previously measured. Thankfully, I didn't have to make any adjustments to my saw, but if I had needed to, the process would be to loosen the bolts that hold the table to the base and adjust the alignment until the blade and miter slots are parallel, and then tighten the bolts back down. To get accurate cuts on the table saw, it's critical that the rip fence is properly adjusted. I find I get the best results when the fence is dead on parallel with the blade, but some folks like to have about a 64th of an inch gap at the backside of the fence. This is done to reduce the likelihood of kickback. Regardless of your preference, the adjustment method is the same. Set the combination square in the miter slot at the front of the table with the end of the rule against the fence. Now check the fence at the back of the table. Since there's a gap, I need to adjust the fence. To do so, I turn the right side jack screw in just a bit and then recheck the front and back of the fence. I continue to make adjustments until the fence is set to my preference. To calibrate the fence and the measuring tape, first raise the blade and slide the fence over until it just touches the blade, and lock the fence down. Next, lay the tape along the guide rail and line up the 0 mark with the red line and the high fence lens. Mark the guide rail at the 0 mark and then stick the measuring tape to the rail, making sure to keep the tape parallel to the rail. Slide the fence back against the blade and adjust the dial if necessary. Now it's time to switch out for the low fence. Slide the fence back against the blade and lock the fence in place. Calibrate the low fence lens by loosening the dial and sliding the lens until it is on the 0 mark, and then tighten the dial back down. Alright, now it's time to assemble the overarm dust collection for this saw. I go ahead and thread the adapters onto the end of each flexible hose, and then loosely attach the clamp to the metal overarm tube so that I can adjust their location as needed while I bolt the assembly to the back rip fence guide rail. I connect the longer flexible hose to the bottom of the tube and to the dust collection port on the saw. Next, I install the blade guard by simply pushing the guard into the quick change mechanism and lock it in place, all without having to remove the table insert. With the blade guard in place, I attach the shorter hose to the top of the tube and to the top of the blade guard. This may seem pretty minor, but I think it's actually a pretty cool design detail. Each side of the blade guard pivots separately from the other side, so this keeps everything consistent to the saw's top, regardless of having the blade set at 90 degrees or any angle. One thing that makes the assembly of this tool pretty quick is that you're not constantly hunting down fasteners. Harvey has all of the fasteners where applicable pre-installed where you'll be needing them. For instance, to install the power switch, I just unscrew the bolts, hold the switch in place, and then run the bolts right back in. The last item to install on the saw is the motor cover. It simply locates into a few barrels that allow the cover to swing open and locks into place with a thumb screw. With the saw together, let's take a look at this miter gauge. The slots on this saw are undercut so the miter gauge can hang in place and it won't lift up out of the slot during a cut. The entire fence can be easily slid left or right by loosening 2 thumb screws on the main body of the miter gauge, and each end of the fence is cut at 45 degrees so that way you can get as close to the blade as possible even when cutting a 45. When it comes to setting the miter gauge at an angle, you first loosen the large red knob, which is hopefully obvious. Then you have 2 options. You can use any one of the standard 7 indexing points, or you can lock out the indexing feature with the slide button on the left side of the miter gauge and dial in any angle between positive and negative 60. To disengage that lock, simply slide the button back and the indexing feature is once again live. The Compass MG36 miter gauge is packed with tons of cool features, but this video would be lacking if I didn't discuss the micro-adjustable flip stop. The stop can slide anywhere along the top of the fence or extension and locks into place with a thumb screw. The flip stop easily swings into or out of position and has multiple holes for the brass locating pin. The location of the flip stop can then be micro-adjusted in increments of 1/1000th of an inch for very precise, repeatable crosscuts. Another cool feature is that the extension and flip stop can be flipped to the other side of the miter gauge. With the extension on the opposite side, just loosen the flip stop and turn it around. The brass locating pin can also be flipped around so that it can be used on either side of the flip stop as well. In the top of the fence on the miter gauge, there's also an adjustable scale, and that helps you to keep track of all those coarse and micro adjustments. Well, there's nothing left to do now but see how this all runs. Here I'm ripping an 8-foot board of hickory because if you're gonna test something out, why not start with one of the hardest woods in North America? As you can see, the saw didn't have any trouble with this cut, and I'm already really excited with the move to this Alpha Series table saw from Harvey.
Alright y'all, so the saw is set up and ready for work. I cannot wait to jump in on my next project with this saw at the center of my workshop. Make sure you stick around, check out my table build video that's going to be coming up here in a couple of weeks. When it's ready, I will link it in the end card so that you can check out this saw in action on a real project and not just being set up.
Ah, you're still there. Awesome. Hey, if you enjoyed this video, I got another one queued up for you right here. And if you want other awesome content from me, check out those. Anyways, hope you enjoyed the video. Please hit the like and subscribe. And until next time, have fun making something.